Because it is my pleasure to now introduce Riza Allen, who is the Youth Trail Program Manager for the Washington Trails Association. They are a community builder and backcountry program manager with over 10 years of experience facilitating immersive learning spaces for students of all ages. Riza, thank you very much for being here. Please take it away.
Thanks, Michelle. It's my honor to be here today speaking with all of you. Gratitude to you, Michelle, for the invitation. I really appreciate it. So my name is Riza Allen, they, them pronouns. And as Michelle mentioned, I'm the Youth Trail Program Manager at Washington Trails Association. And Michelle and I actually met at the Wilderness Risk Management Conference this past October in Vermont, if I'm remembering correctly. So connected there, and then Michelle told me about this leadership series that you do with your leaders at the Mountaineers and invited me to come speak with you on a topic near and dear to my heart, which is making the outdoors more inclusive and affirming for queer people. And so today I'll be doing pretty much the same presentation I did at WRMC, which was an 18-minute time slot, but I've expanded it a little bit to not just talk about shared identity spaces for queer folks, but how we can make all of our programs that are open to folks of all identities, more inclusive and affirming for people who might identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, asexual, two-spirit. The list goes on. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So I don't have a video preference. Once I start sharing my screen, I cannot see any of you. So feel free to turn your video off if that's most comfortable. And Michelle, it'll be hard for me to monitor the chat in that. So if you can just turn on your sound and interrupt me, if anyone has a specific question at that moment, that would be what would be really helpful to me. So I will go ahead and jump right in. So first I will share my screen. And then I'm going to make it. All right, Michelle, can I get a thumbs up if that looks good? Cool, thank you. So doing the work, how can we all as leaders work together to make our programs more inclusive and affirming for LGBTQ folks? That's what we're here to talk about today. Together we know a lot, and I'm sure that there is also knowledge in this space with other people, not just me as the presenter, on how to do this. So I do look forward at the end to just being in community with you all and also hearing your own perspectives, maybe a personal experience on what's worked for you. But one thing that we do at WTA on my team is we start every team meeting with appreciations. And it's been a really grounding and beautiful ritual for us as a team. And I wanted to start my presentation here as well, because one thing about making all these programs better is that none of us are doing it alone, right? We're doing it in community. And the same is true of my work at WTA. So I wanted to throw it all the way back to 2018, which is where WTA's journey on offering shared identity events for queer people came about. We went to the first ever LGBTQ outdoor summit in, I believe, Colorado that year. And my coworker, Casey Darso, was able to hear an awesome presentation from the Northwest Youth Corps Rainbow Crew leaders. And that really inspired them to come back to WTA and try something new. And so major shout out to my coworker, Casey. Some of you, if you work with any of the Mountaineers youth programs, might have met Casey. Casey's our youth trail crew leader who gets out with the Mountaineers Explorers, MAC and Junior MAC clubs a couple of times a year. And so Casey really put in a lot of the work that first year in 2019 to get WTA ready to pilot our own shared identity youth crew. And then just so much love and appreciation to all of the staff and volunteers since then who have participated and helped us make them better as we go. For those of you who might not be familiar with WTA, our mission is to mobilize hikers and everyone who loves the outdoor to explore, steward, and champion trails and public lands. A lot of people know us from our hiking guide online. Maybe you've done trail work with us or participated in our advocacy actions. But the reason I'm still at WTA after 6 pretty intense field seasons, those of you who do field work know it can be, pretty hard on the body, is our vision. And so WTA's vision is a vision for trails for everyone, which you'll see here on my screen. And what that means to us is that everyone, has the chance to recreate outdoors and have safe and welcoming and inclusive experiences on trail. If there's one thing we know coming up on the third anniversary of the pandemic starting, right, it's that, trails and access to the outdoors are a must-have and are vitally important, for so many different people. One thing that's also just as true, though, is that outdoor spaces aren't always safe and accessible for everyone, nor is our state's hiking community as welcoming as it should be sometimes. And so, with your help, with the help of all of the hikers in our community, we want to change that, so that our trails really are a welcoming, inclusive, safe, and rewarding place for everyone forever. So I manage WTA's Youth Trail Program, which is a statewide stewardship program. We lead single day and multi-day camping and trail work trips for youth ages 10 to 18. And so that's kind of my approach to this. I worked a lot with our youth programs, but in this presentation, I will also be talking a lot about what we've done with our adult programming as well. So what are shared identity spaces? Well, simply put, they are spaces where we address participation barriers specific to a marginalized identity. We used to call these single identity events at WTA, and our language has changed over the years as we've realized that, none of us really have just one identity that shows up and that we bring around, right? We all have many intersecting identities that inform our experience. So, for us, shared identity is the term that feels most comfortable. Because when we talk about the LGBTQ community, even LGBTQ, like that is so many different identities in one acronym, right? And there are other identities like interplay with each other to affect our experiences. So like a good example would be, even within like an LGBTQ or queer shared identity space, people are going to come into that space with different experiences. So, for example, if you have a white gay man and a Black woman, queer woman coming into the space, they're not going to have the same experience in the world despite both being members of this LGBTQ experience because of how their gender identity, their race and ethnicity, how all these other things come into play. And so, it's a big umbrella. I like to say it's the alphabet soup, right? And there are a lot of queer folks, queer identities who don't even have a letter in the LGBTQ umbrella. And so that's largely to say it's not, it's a big group of people and that there are lots of differences in experience within the group of people. But for purposes of this presentation, shared identity spaces for LGBTQ folks are kind of like folks who identify within that LGBTQ umbrella. So the way that these events, we think of them as different than just an event open to people of all identities is that at WTA, we're specifically trying to offer these experiences for communities who may have been marginalized from mainstream outdoor opportunities or conservation, specifically. So take the field of trail work. It's not unlike a lot of other outdoor jobs, has been largely white, largely male, largely cisgender, a very heteronormative or straight kind of like culture, right, over time. And so with trail work, when we're thinking about, providing opportunities for folks from marginalized identities to participate in our programs or in taking care of the land or in hiking, we really want to look at folks who haven't had the same sort of easy baseline access to that work. So that's what they are, but like, why do we do them? Why here 4 years later, are we really doubling down on these opportunities? And one is to provide a volunteer experience where folks with marginalized identities might feel more at ease in our programs. And I say might because shared identity spaces, aren't perfect. And we all still have just because you're a member of a community doesn't mean that you might not ever mess up or make someone else feel uncomfortable within that community. So they might make folks feel more at ease at our program, specifically because participants might not feel forced to assimilate, change their language or personality, what we call code switching, or be subjected to as many microaggressions. And, providing these more approachable experiences might help people try trail work for the first time. You could sub in mountaineering or whatever activity, rock climbing, right? But for us, it's trail work. And then a successful first trip can result in increased confidence and a stronger community. Providing a safe space for people with identities that are underrepresented in our volunteer base is also a key step in increasing equitable participation and leadership in our work parties. So something you may or may not know about WTA is that many of our leaders are volunteers, which I think is similar to the Mountaineers model as well, right? It's not all staff out there. So if we want to have a more diverse and representative leadership group, we need to get folks involved in our programming, at all levels of the organization. And then greater connections and cultural competencies throughout our organization will help us engage more hikers and volunteers overall. Being a more inclusive and welcoming organization brings more people to us. Folks have a better experience and they keep giving back. And so just to illustrate this a little bit, I wanted to share a quote from a youth on our first ever youth volunteer vacation. So it's a little long, bear with me, but this is from one of the teenagers on our first LGBTQ youth trip in 2019. They said, "I am interested in being outside the city with people who think like me and people who want to make the environment a little bit better here in Washington State. I would like to spend time doing manual labor, and I greatly enjoyed the last trip I went on. That trip that I went on with Casey was a life-changing experience. Never before in my near-decade experience with summer camps and trips have I felt so accepted and welcomed. Never have I felt more in control of myself and more in my element. I had never been with a group of peers and leaders so caring and understanding. This trip changed my entire mindset about summer activities with people my age. I want to feel like I fit in. My pronouns are they, them, and I am much more capable than I look, sometimes even give myself credit for. And to be completely honest, I just want to live with people who make me feel like I'm just human and average and normal." So that's a quote from one of our teen volunteers talking about their particular experience. And, we know that these trips work. And Michelle might see me flipping through my notes. At the last minute, I can't see my notes on my presentation. So I'm flipping through trying to find all my quotes. So thanks for your patience here as I dive into that a little bit. But we know that they work. Our volunteers this is our first ever LGBTQ event. It was called, what did we call it? Earth Gay, because it was on Earth Day. And you can see it was very well attended, lots of smiles, and it's only went up from there. This is a photo from our LGBTQ youth volunteer vacation, just some youth in action here. I'm realizing my quotes are all buried and not printed, so perhaps we can come back to those. But the short story is we found that through testimonials, these experiences really have provided a platform for many new people to try trail work and giving back with WTA for the first time. Most of our volunteers on these events are first-time volunteers, and more than one of them, many of them have shared that it was this particular shared identity offering that encouraged them to come out with us. Okay, but you can see I'm getting ahead of myself. Here's the real point of the presentation. So yes, we've been hosting these shared identity events for 4 years, specifically for queer people, and they've been really successful. But what I'm the most excited to talk with you about here today is actually the biggest thing we've learned in 4 years of doing this, because Lord knows that we've made mistakes, we've had opportunities to grow. And so I can only see a couple of you, but if you want to play along with me and give me a little drum roll for our biggest learning. Thank you, Jennifer. You're the only one I can see. I appreciate you. Our biggest learning is that all of the things that we've started doing specifically for the queer trip are actually things that are just best practices to do on every trip, no matter who the audience is, right? And, teacher speak, we call those universal accommodations, right? They are practices that when we apply them to all of our work, tend to benefit many different people and the group as a whole, not just that original group that we might have thought of when thinking about them. And so I wanted to spend some time really today talking about the universal accommodations that have stuck with us in our work, so that if there are any there that are really resonating with you, that's something you can build on as well. So the first and biggest one is just don't make assumptions, right? In general, every person coming into our programs is an individual. And like we talked about before with intersecting identities, like not all identities are visible, not all needs and experiences are visible. I can't just like look at Michelle and I don't know who Michelle is just by looking at her, right? I need to get to know her in order to, I need Michelle to tell me who she is, what she's about, and what she needs. And so, specifically with LGBTQ participants, this comes up a couple ways. Michelle talked about pronouns at the start, both, in introductions and on administrative paperwork. Something Michelle said that I also really liked was, pronouns if you'd like to, and that's something that really resonates with me. I think in general, pronouns are just a part of the language that stands in for your name, right? And so if people feel comfortable sharing their pronouns, of course, we would like them to, so that we know how to refer to them. But if they don't feel comfortable, that's fine. Like folks have their reasons why they might not want to share in a particular space. And we need to honor that. And you can always just use someone's name. You don't need to just guess, right? But you can just use their name and it works just as well. On our overnight trips, especially with the teens, we like to talk about menstruation and proper disposal of menstrual products with participants of all genders, just because, for example, you may have trans youth or adults on your trip who are menstruating, and you might not assume that or know that based on their gender presentation, for example. You'll also notice I just use the menstruation language, right? Trying to keep it super gender neutral. It's just something some bodies do. And then specifically with youth who might be binding, and so if they're binding their chest while doing strenuous physical activity, which is something that might come up on your programming. So we want to make sure we're talking with folks about taking breaks from binding specifically. So that's something I'd be happy to talk with folks a little bit more about. But so we're not making assumptions and we're dismantling binaries. So the biggest one, I feel like, especially in youth programming that comes up is heteronormative sorting of participants. Girls cabin, boys cabin, girls tent, boys tent. And that is one of the quickest ways that you can isolate someone who doesn't belong in either of those groups, right? It's it can be really stressful to have two options and neither one's a good one for you. And so, I also, this one's near and dear to my heart too, because I think what people often mean with girls and boys cabin is they want to avoid sexual contact between program participants on the trip, right? So let's be explicit about what we're trying to do and set an expectation. Even that baseline assumption is slightly problematic because it still is assuming, heterosexual contact between participants and kind of excludes the experience of gay youth. So in general, don't do it unless you have a compelling reason to, and I've yet to hear a super compelling reason. On our youth ambassador trips at WTA, we did end up having, because some of the, some people also, some girls, some boys, those identities are valid, right? And so some folks may feel more comfortable in a women's only space, a girls only space. We do have an all girls trip with our WTA summer youth program. But what we also had was an all gender cabin that had the adults staying in there, right? So there is like supervision in a mixed gender space because that's what made parents and teens feel most comfortable, but we're also not forcing anyone to choose a binary option of where to sleep. The other thing is becoming fluent screening medical forms for participants of all genders. So being familiar with things that might show up on forms for trans youth, especially, or if there's anything you need to know about there. And then upholding community norms and expectations with project partners and crew visitors. So sometimes we build a really strong and secure crew, right? And everyone's on the same page. And then the next day, the land manager comes to visit and misgenders a bunch of teens or tells a sexist joke, right? That makes everyone feel uncomfortable. And when that happens, it's really important for us to stand up for our crew as leaders and not only interrupt that and, maintain crew safety, but if possible, to also report it. If you, like, for example, I'm not sure if you all have like an incident report form for your Mountaineers. I'm seeing nodding. Okay, good. That makes a lot of sense. So filling out an incident report form, keeping track of these over time. And for really serious behaviors, we're reporting it up the chain with the land management agency or whoever. And if they're just random hikers, just do your leader thing and let them know they need to leave the area. They're not welcome in the group space, Ensuring appropriate privacy for program participants can be really important. I find as I get older, I am just so much more into privacy than I was as a younger person. And, this starts early, which is when you're reviewing participant administrative or medical information, being really careful with that, following all the legal rules on that, not sharing that with folks who shouldn't have access to that. And then also on, multi-day trips or even single day, thinking about your bathroom access, thinking about shower or where folks are changing, and just making sure that every participant does have an opportunity to have appropriate privacy when they're doing those things. And this last one, I'm not going to spend too much time on, largely just for my own sense of mental well-being, but research state, local, and federal laws that might impact program participants and their safety of sense of well-being at participating in your programs. And right now, there are over 400 bills in various states of legislation across the US attacking queer and trans people. And it's kind of a hard time for a lot of us, quite honestly. It's a heavy time. And I don't have a lot of space to say more about it. We are fairly lucky living in Washington State currently, that there still are some of those being proposed in the Washington State House, but it's very unlikely they'll be passed. And anyway, I'll just kind of leave it at that. But if you're ever operating in a place outside of Washington State and you may have LGBTQ and or trans people on your program, it's really important for you as a leader to understand what laws might be in effect that could impact their safety on the program, and how you can best support them through that. Okay. So that's just a quick list of like some of the universal accommodations we do on just every trip now. This is just for like every trip. These are the things we're thinking about, no matter who's going out. It could be a crew of 10, straight cisgender people, no queer people in sight. We're still going to do these things because we believe that everyone benefits from them. When we're hosting an LGBTQ specific event, though, here's a couple of additional things we do. A big one is representational leadership, the bias for us idea. But so I did want to read one more quote about why this is so important. But what that just means is that whoever is leading the trip is also a member of the community the trip is for, right? And so this quote is from Mel Hanby, who was one of the trail crew leaders for the first Rainbow Crew at Northwest Youth Corps. And Mel said, "Beyond providing a safe environment for the crew to learn work skills that they can later apply to their professional lives, The Rainbow Crew also gives many of the Corps members their first LGBTQ role models. Hanby, who identifies as a transgender man, explains that on his first trip with the Corps, he got to know a Corps leader who was the first trans man he had ever met. It was life-changing, he said. I didn't know adult trans men existed. I didn't know we made it that far in life. What I think is amazing about having identity-specific crews is that a lot of people, including myself when I was 16, are terrified to learn wilderness skills while having to deal with homophobia or transphobia. In the Rainbow Crew, we don't have to worry about that. So I thought that was a really powerful share from Mel on his experience. One other thing I'll add on this is when WTA started advertising shared identity crews, such as the LGBTQ youth group, we had a huge increase in the quality of our candidate pool for our crew leader roles. Whenever folks saw us kind of like leading with inclusion and creating space that way, not only did the sheer number of applicants double, but the quality went way, way up. Folks who were deeply personally committed to DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion work and have this lived experience to build off of were more interested in working with us when our commitment became more visible that way. So just something interesting that we noticed. We also, on any shared identity event, put in surge capacity staffing, which for us just means extra leaders on the trip. We do know that folks from, marginalized communities and backgrounds often are carrying more trauma with them out in these places. And so we just like to make sure we have plenty of support around for anything that might come up. And then this last one is a little, it might seem counterintuitive to some people, but when possible, especially for our LGBTQ events, we try to reduce interactions with the general public for the duration of the event. And this is something that we've come to over time, largely because we just found that a 12-person exuberant, joyful queer crew can kind of be a magnet for hate or for inappropriate public comments or just people getting way too up in our business while we're out there, and then sometimes doing things that are harmful and hurt people. And so we've decided, as much as we want to show off and celebrate what's happening, that during the event itself, we're actually just going to try to give that crew as much space as possible to build a container and have, really have more control over the type of experience they're having out there. So I also, through my Mountaineers email, saw a couple cool resources of things you all are doing internally that I wanted to call out that supports this work. I was exposed to the Equity and Inclusion Leader Toolkit. Thanks, Michelle J. We just wanted to make sure everyone knows about. And then I'm really interested in, I haven't done the e-learning course yet, but it's on my to-do list, this Emotional Safety in the Outdoors e-learning course. I thought that just both of those Mountaineers provided resources seemed just to really dovetail with this type of work and really support that. So I just wanted to make sure that folks knew that those are a thing you can do. Yeah, and then for our last little sort of reflection before I just pause and open it up for more general questions, I wanted to talk about this model: comfort zone, stretch zone, panic zone. And your comfort zone is like low-hanging fruit, right? It's something new you could start doing, or something you could start doing slightly differently that wouldn't take that much effort, and you could do it pretty quickly and without a lot of emotional turmoil, right? Comfortable, right? Stretch zone are those things that maybe you feel a little nervous to try. I wouldn't call it low-hanging fruit. You might have to put a foot up on the tree and lean back a little, trying to pick the apple or whatever. But it's still something that you think that you could do with proper resourcing and support. Panic zone is you think about doing this new thing and you go into fight or flight, and that's just not what's happening for you right now. So as I'm pausing my screen share here, I did want to just like hold a minute here for folks to sort of personally reflect on just what I've shared so far. And if there are any things in there that are in your comfort zone, maybe there are things you're already doing or things you might consider doing slightly differently as a leader. But then maybe more importantly is like, what's in your stretch zone, right? Is there anything I mentioned today that you'd be really excited to try, but you might need to like phone a friend, talk it through, have a co-leader there the first time? Or are there ideas that maybe I presented that are like stretching your concept of what leadership might look like, you know, and you want to spend more time noodling on that, right? Or learning more. So as I'm stopping my screen share, I'll just go ahead and ask folks to reflect on that for a minute. And then at this point, if folks are comfortable turning back on your camera, it would certainly help me have a sense of who I'm connecting to and better respond to questions, but no pressure. And maybe we can use the raise hand function for questions, Michelle. Does that work? Cool. Thanks for sitting through that with me. I appreciate you all being here. And if anyone has questions or in that spirit of, you know, together we know a lot, something you want to offer and share, I think now's the time for that. Kimberly, go ahead.
Hi, Kimberly, you're on mute right now. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I'm gonna unmute. Can you please give us some more idea about how to implement appropriate, like overnight accommodations and toileting accommodations? I don't know. I mean, I heard what you said, but I'm not sure I fully understand what you're doing in WTA. But when you're leading these marvelous new teams of people,
Yeah.
what are the words you're using? Or are you implementing multiple facilities, or just a single and everyone
Great.
chooses? Or
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. Thanks for giving me that invitation. So specifically, if we are having a shared identity trip for LGBTQ folks, like I said, we're really thinking about privacy. Does everyone have appropriate privacy? And this is just kind of in general on trips, right? So honestly, backcountry where we're digging a latrine, easy, right? There's one bathroom. We all go one at a time. Everyone uses the same restroom. We will talk about how to dispose of toilet paper and menstrual products just to the whole group at the start of the trip. If you have this, do this kind of a discussion. It's honestly those front country settings, which can be more tricky because most, for example, bathroom facilities, are heavily gendered. There's typically like a men's and a women's. And what we're just really trying to think about is like, does everyone have somewhere safe to go to the bathroom? Because what's not safe is folks avoiding using the restroom on trip, right? We're always trying to get people to poop on the trip. Like it's a really important thing. And so in that case, our preference is for like single stall restrooms, right? With a locking door, just one person at a time. And we'll often take a piece of paper and put it over the gendered language and just put like all gender bathroom, right? Just to be super clear. But we do have times where we need to use gendered restrooms, and in that instance, if it's possible to relabel them where we're at, just say anyone can use any one, we will. If not, we just check in with each participant individually, and if there are teens who might be more at risk of being harassed for using the restroom, we'll just make sure they have a buddy, right? We're looking out for safety. It's just always about safety. So those are some examples. What we'll also do, like for tenting, we're fine with youth of opposite genders, different genders sharing a tent on the trip. They just need to communicate it in advance to us. We don't want any mid-trip romances leading to shared tenting. And so we're just like, yeah, let us know in advance, and that's fine. And the expectation is just that everyone's behaving, in a non-sexual way for the duration of the trip, with other people. So those are some examples. One other thing I'll just add in terms of like menstrual products specifically, if we have like group trash, group camp multi-day, we do provide every participant with like a Ziploc bag and a brown paper bag for them to take to the restroom with them. And so if they have specific like menstrual products, for example, use menstrual products, they have something safe to store it in that's also like invisible to others, if that makes sense. The Ziploc goes inside the brown paper bag, and then folks don't have to worry about like having privacy coming to and from the restroom. And I'm pulling up the chat here, but are there other questions or additions from the group?
I had a question about, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that there was a question in the chat, but Annie, feel free to go first, and then I'll read out the question next.
Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this presentation. It's been really great to kind of have a lot of these things to think on going forward in future trips and things like that. One of the things that I was interested in hearing more about was, you mentioned kind of creating that container space to keep your trips kind of away from the general public. Could you speak more on how you kind of do that? Because I'm thinking of like a group trip on like a crowded trail, or where it might be kind of hard to create that boundary, so to speak. How do you go about doing that?
So for us, just the nature of our programming, I work for a trail building org and team. So we're usually going out to do trail work, which means that I am specifically there at the request of the land management agency. And so so back in November is when I started planning my July and August trips for this year. I don't know if that resonates for anyone. And we knew that we wanted to do another LGBTQ youth trip. And so kind of the steps for that, for building that container, like I mentioned, backcountry trips in general are usually lower traffic, more contained camp exposure typically. So I knew I was really interested in a backcountry location if possible. And then also just enthusiastic land manager support. So for us, if I tell the land manager we want to run this trip of queer kids this summer, what do you think? And they're not like an enthusiastic, like, heck yeah, then I'm like, cool, we're not doing it with you this year, because our number one goal for that is just everyone being on board to support those teens when they come out and being like really affirming of their presence. So that's the things we kind of look at as I just start down the checklist. Really, I'm like, okay, is there a way to camp in a less crowded place? And so another example of that is at Mount Rainier National Park. We've camped at the Ipsit Creek campground. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar, but it's like a hybrid front country, back country kind of thing, low traffic. We've also camped in like a volunteer campground, right? So it's like more limited, just other folks who are coming to volunteer. And then I'm just asking all those questions before making the commitment. I make sure I know what the bathrooms are like. I make sure I know the land manager is supportive. I make sure that the project itself is going to be meaningful for the teens and not like so hard they all hate trail work and have a terrible time. So that's some examples. And then the three litter staffing.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, and I'll speak to the binding issue. So how does a leader provide a safe place to give participants a break from binding? So I'll just speak from my own experience and that of kind of what I've talked with other teens. But the safety concern with binding is for duration of time, right? So when folks are binding their chest, right, they're compressing their chest in a way that we want to make sure that they're having plenty of downtime where they are not binding at all, right? And so for people with any kind of like body dysmorphia, or honestly, for whatever reason, I'll speak for myself, typically if you're binding, you don't necessarily want to be in a public place or public view when you're not binding, I think is a typical experience, right? So making sure that there is downtime for the participant to go to their tent, even just for like half an hour, right? Like that's a safe private space where they can go take a load off, read a book, and remove their binder for a little while. Would be like, that's kind of the classic way we do it. So since we're at trail work from like 8:30 till 3:30, we have like 2 hours after that where we're back at camp, free time, where folks can take care of whatever body need they have, not just binding. What other questions do folks have?
I guess I have experience with this because I have nest spring who are identifying in various ways. And I sometimes am finding, that I screw up. I use the wrong name or I use the wrong pronoun because it's new to me. And it's not new in their lives because, they did a transition, a year or 2 years ago, but it's new for me. And I'm just curious if you have a reaction to that. I'm never sure. I always feel bad. I mean, I always try to instantly correct and say I'm sorry, but is there
Yeah.
anything better to do?
I appreciate the question, and I appreciate you hearing you say like you're trying to be there for the people in your life, right? And I think if you make a mistake, yeah, a quick correction and moving on is often the best approach, like for example, you use someone's wrong pronouns, go, oh, sorry, I meant this, move on, and then just move on, right? We all make mistakes. I would say that especially if you have people in your life who are experimenting with different pronouns or who are just full on using different pronouns and you're struggling, my favorite thing to do is to just like is homework. Basically, it's like, everyone makes mistakes. And if we're making repeated mistakes, we want to like take responsibility for ourselves to like learn and grow and make fewer mistakes, not keep making the same mistake, right? So honestly, take a book. This is what I'll do. You can just take a book, and every time you see a certain pronoun, like change it, read it out loud, change it to the one you're trying to get comfortable using. Or just practice in your head, practice a conversation with someone, like practice talking about that person with another loved one in your head. I know that sounds weird, but just practice, but correct yourself and move on. I think is often just generally the best approach. I will just also share that I've made mistakes with myself, which are the most frustrating mistakes. Like we're all learning and unlearning. And I think the most important part is just to do that work to not repeat mistakes. Well, Michelle, I thought that I might just drop my email in the chat if there's anything folks don't feel comfortable asking here, or you just have stuff that comes up later and you'd feel like sending me an email, like please feel free to. And it looks like there's an awesome book recommendation in the chat as well on this topic for folks who want to see it. But yeah, I think I can't believe so many people are here at 6 p.m. on a Monday night. So just thank you for being here in the space with me and the good questions. And thanks for all the work that y'all are doing in the field to, get folks outside and facilitate these experiences for other people too. I'll just turn it back to you, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Riza. And thank you very much to all of you as well. I just want to give my thanks to Riza for joining us tonight, for you as well, coming on 6 o'clock on a Monday evening to speak with us. Yes, everything that Riza has shared, I'll be following up in an email tomorrow. And for some reason that has reminded me to turn off the recording.